They walked until the forest's geometry lost its meaning. The path twisted, doubled back, narrowed, widened, then vanished entirely, only to reappear beneath their feet as if drawn by their intention. Trees leaned closer, not to block them, but to listen. Leaves trembled without wind. The ground felt alert, responsive, like a surface that remembered every step ever taken upon it. Ken felt the awareness pressing against his skin. Not fear, not exactly. More like the tension before a question is asked. Raymond noticed it too. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. They kept moving. Minutes or hours later, the forest shifted. The trees thinned, opening into a circular clearing that felt older than anything they had yet encountered. The earth here was darker, richer, marked with faint patterns that spiraled outward from a central point. The air carried a gravity that pulled attention inward. At the center stood a low stone formation, not quite an altar, not quite a monument. Its surface was worn smooth, as if countless hands had rested there across centuries. Thin cracks ran through it, glowing faintly, not with light but with presence. Ken slowed. This place, it's thinking. Raymond nodded. Or remembering. As they approached, the unseen thread in Raymond's chest tightened, not painfully but insistently. It wasn't pulling him forward. It was aligning him. Ken felt something similar, a subtle internal reorientation, as if his inner balance was being recalibrated. They stopped a few steps from the stone. The forest exhaled. Not a sound, not a movement, but a release of pressure that made the space feel suddenly vast. The awareness around them sharpened, focusing. Then the force emerged. It did not take a physical form. It never had. Instead, it revealed itself through distortion, a bending of perception that caused the space between objects to stretch and compress. The clearing seemed to fold inward, not collapsing, but narrowing its attention until Ken and Raymond stood at its core. The presence felt closer now. Not looming. Conversational. Testing. You walk differently, the force observed, its presence resonating through thought rather than sound. Ken stiffened. Raymond felt the words land directly inside him, bypassing hearing, bypassing language. We chose to, Raymond answered. A pause followed, thick with calculation. Choice is fragile, the force replied. It fractures under pressure. Ken stepped forward half a pace. So does fear. And we've spent enough time letting you shape us with it. The force's attention shifted toward him. The clearing responded, the faint patterns in the soil pulsing subtly, like a slow heartbeat. Fear is not my creation, it said. It is a door. I merely stand behind it. Raymond inhaled slowly. Then step aside. Another pause. The forest seemed to lean closer. I cannot, the force said. Nor can you. The threshold you crossed does not allow retreat. Only depth. Ken glanced at Raymond. What does that mean? Raymond didn't answer immediately. His attention had been pulled inward, toward the thread in his chest. The sensation had changed again, no longer a test, but a connection widening, linking him not just to the clearing, but to the force itself. It means, Raymond said carefully, that whatever this is, it's not just something acting on us. It's something we're already inside. The force did not deny it. You are not separate from consequence, it said. You never were. You simply pretended you could be. Ken's pulse quickened, but he kept his footing. So what happens now? The clearing dimmed slightly, as if light itself were uncertain how to behave. Now, the force said, you are confronted with the weight of your unspoken truths. The air thickened. Ken felt something stir behind his ribs, a pressure that wasn't physical but emotional, a rising awareness of everything he had avoided naming. Regrets. Doubts. Anger he had disguised as indifference. Fear he had mistaken for logic. Raymond experienced the same, but deeper, older. The accumulated gravity of years spent making choices without fully acknowledging their cost. Images flickered at the edges of their perception. Moments from their past, not as memories, but as emotional imprints. Ken saw himself standing in rooms where he had remained silent instead of speaking, watching harm unfold while convincing himself it wasn't his place to interfere. turning away from people who needed him because involvement felt too dangerous. Raymond saw crossroads, each marked by a choice he had rationalized. Paths taken not because they were right but because they were safer. Lives intersected briefly, then lost, not through malice, but through neglect. Neither of them was shown catastrophe. There was no spectacle. Only the quiet accumulation of small betrayals against their own values. Ken clenched his hands. "Is this your test?" "It is not a test," the force replied. "It is a mirror." The pressure increased. Ken staggered, not physically but internally. The weight of recognition hit him harder than fear ever had. He had built so much of himself around avoidance, around staying unnoticed, around minimizing risk. He had mistaken caution for wisdom. Raymond felt something similar fracture inside him. The careful architecture of control he had built, the emotional distance he had cultivated, suddenly seemed fragile, even cowardly. "We can't change what's already happened," Ken said, voice tight. "No," the force agreed. "But you can no longer pretend it didn't shape you." The clearing responded, the faint patterns in the ground shifting, reconfiguring. Raymond took a step forward. "So what do you want?" The force's attention sharpened. "I want honesty," it said. "Not confession. Alignment. You have learned to walk together, but you have not yet learned to see each other without distortion." Ken turned toward Raymond. "What does that mean?" Raymond hesitated. For the first time since entering the forest, he didn't have a prepared answer. The force pressed gently, inexorably. "Say what you have withheld," it urged. "Not as accusation. As truth." The silence stretched. Ken felt his throat tighten. There were things he had never admitted aloud, not even to himself. Doubts about Raymond. Resentments he had buried. A fear that their partnership was built more on necessity than trust. Raymond, too, carried unspoken judgments, quiet assumptions, calculations he had never shared. The forest waited. Ken swallowed. "I was angry at you," he said quietly. "Not just scared. Angry. Because you always seemed to know what to do. And when things went wrong, I felt like it was because I hadn't kept up. Like I was the weak link." Raymond closed his eyes briefly. The admission struck deeper than accusation would have. "I didn't say it," Ken continued, "because I didn't want to resent you. But I did. Sometimes." Raymond exhaled slowly. "I thought you doubted me." Ken shook his head. "I doubted myself." The force remained silent, allowing the words to settle. Raymond opened his eyes. "I assumed your hesitation meant you didn't trust my judgment. So I stopped explaining myself. I started deciding alone. I told myself it was efficiency." Ken looked at him. And it was control," Raymond admitted. "Disguised as leadership." The clearing seemed to soften, the pressure easing just slightly. "Truth alters structure," the force said, "even when it does not erase consequence." Ken felt something unclench in his chest. Not relief exactly. More like recalibration. Raymond sensed it too, a subtle shift in the internal geometry. That linked them. The force's attention widened, encompassing them both. "You are learning to stand in the open," it said. "But openness invites exposure." The clearing darkened further, the forest beyond it retreating into shadow. From the edges of perception movement stirred. Not physical shapes, not creatures, but fragments of memory and emotion given temporary coherence. Doubt took form. Regret gathered mass. Fear condensed into presence. Ken's breath caught. "What is that?" "Your unresolved selves," the force replied. "They do not vanish because you acknowledge them. They must be integrated." The pressure surged. Ken felt his earlier admissions rise back up, amplified, distorted. His self-doubt began to speak in 1,000 internal voices, each insisting he was unprepared, unworthy, incapable. Raymond felt the echo of control tighten, urging him to retreat inward, to lock down emotionally, to reclaim dominance over uncertainty. The clearing contracted. Ken staggered, clutching at his chest. Raymond reached for him, steadying him. Stay with me. The force did not intervene. You are not being attacked, it said. You are being revealed. Ken shook his head. This feels worse. It often does, the force replied, because revelation removes your ability to hide. The pressure intensified. Ken's vision blurred, not from darkness, but from emotional overload. Every moment he had doubted himself surged forward, merging into a single oppressive weight. Raymond felt the same, his instincts screaming to retreat, to shut down, to regain control by withdrawing. Instead, he held on. Ken, he said steadily. Look at me. Ken struggled to focus. Don't fight it, Raymond continued. Anchor yourself. Not against it. Through it. Ken met his gaze. Something steadied. The pressure did not vanish, but it became navigable. Raymond turned inward, not to suppress his instincts, but to examine them. He felt the old reflex to command, to isolate, to calculate. Instead of rejecting it, he acknowledged it, tracing its origins back through years of responsibility, fear, and loss. Ken did the same, following his self-doubt backward, uncovering moments of early failure, small humiliations, disappointments that had taught him caution. Neither pushed the sensations away. They let them pass through. The clearing responded, its oppressive density slowly redistributing, like a storm dispersing into layered clouds. The force watched. Integration, it observed, is not victory. It is balance. The shapes at the edge of perception thinned, losing coherence. Ken straightened, breath uneven but steadying. Raymond felt the internal tension ease, replaced by a fragile equilibrium. For a moment, they simply stood there, absorbing the aftermath. Then the forest shifted again. The clearing began to dissolve, its boundaries blurring, giving way to a narrow passage leading deeper into the woods. This path felt different, less reactive, more deliberate. Ken studied it. Is that where we go? Yes, the force said. But understand this. The deeper you move, the less separation exists between your choices and their consequences. Raymond nodded. So there's no buffer left. None, the force confirmed. Only immediacy. Ken exhaled slowly. That's not comforting. Comfort is not a reliable guide, the force replied. The passage darkened, its edges indistinct. Raymond placed a hand on Ken's shoulder again. Still ready. Ken hesitated, then nodded. I don't think readiness is the right word anymore. But I'm here. That will suffice, the force said. They stepped forward. The forest closed in, not with hostility, but with focused attention. The air grew denser, as if saturated with latent intention. Every step felt consequential, each movement echoing faintly through unseen layers. The path sloped downward, winding between ancient trunks whose roots knotted together beneath the surface. The ground felt warmer here, almost alive. Ken noticed subtle shifts in the environment responding to their presence. When he hesitated, the path seemed to narrow. When Raymond steadied his pace, the passage smoothed. This place is reading us, Ken murmured. Yes, Raymond replied. And reflecting us. They walked in silence, not out of fear, but concentration. After a time, the forest opened again, this time into a vast hollow. The space was cavernous, the canopy arching so high it vanished into darkness. At its center, suspended above the ground, hovered a complex lattice of faintly glowing lines, interwoven in impossible geometry. Ken stopped. What is that? The convergence, the force said, where intention, memory, and consequence intersect. Raymond studied it. That looks unstable. It is dynamic, the force corrected. Like you. As they approached, the lattice shifted, its patterns rearranging in response to their proximity. Ken felt a subtle pull, not forward, but inward, as if the structure were drawing attention toward their core selves. What happens if we touch it? Ken asked. You do not touch it, the force replied. You enter alignment with it. Raymond's jaw tightened. And the cost? Clarity, the force said. Which is rarely gentle. Ken glanced at Raymond. We're past gentle. They stepped closer. The lattice expanded, its glowing lines threading outward, wrapping the space around them in intricate arcs. The air vibrated with restrained intensity. Ken felt his awareness stretching, pulled into unfamiliar dimensions of perception. He sensed not just the forest, but the vast network of cause and effect woven through it, threads of choice radiating endlessly. Raymond experienced the same, his mind struggling to map the complexity. Every decision they had ever made appeared connected to countless unseen outcomes, branching infinitely. "This is overwhelming," Ken whispered. "Yes," the force agreed. "This is responsibility." The lattice brightened. Ken felt himself standing on the edge of comprehension, his identity momentarily dissolving into pure awareness. Raymond steadied himself, anchoring his perception through controlled breathing, through the familiar weight of his own thoughts. Then, within the vast web, something shifted. A new presence stirred. Not the force they had been engaging, but something adjacent, something newly awakened by their proximity. The lattice trembled. Ken felt at first a subtle distortion, like a wrong note in an otherwise precise composition. "Raymond," he murmured. "Do you feel that?" "Yes," Raymond said. "Something's changing." The force's attention sharpened, its earlier composure tightening. "The forest adapts," it said, "but not always predictably." The lattice's patterns began to reorganize more rapidly, lines intersecting at sharper angles, light intensifying. Ken's pulse quickened. "Is this what you meant about it learning?" "Yes," the force replied. "You have altered its equilibrium." The hollow seemed to contract, space bending inward. Raymond steadied Ken again. "Whatever this is, we face it the same way. Together. Deliberately." Ken nodded, though tension coiled in his chest. The lattice pulsed. Within its shifting geometry, new configurations began to form, hinting at structures not yet fully realized, possibilities condensing into near presence. The forest held its breath. And in that suspended moment, as consequence gathered weight and intention sharpened into focus, Ken and Raymond stood at the threshold of something neither of them yet understood, aware only that the next step would not simply test them, but redefine the nature of their journey itself. The lattice did not collapse or explode. It unfolded. Its geometry loosened, each line separating into finer threads that drifted outward, weaving themselves into the hollow, the forest, and the air between Ken and Raymond. The structure did not vanish. It redistributed, becoming less centralized, more ambient, as if the environment itself were assuming the shape of the convergence. Ken felt the shift immediately. The sense of pressure changed direction, no longer pressing inward but radiating outward, touching every part of him at once. It was not invasive. It was intimate, like standing in the center of a vast awareness that was learning his outline. Raymond steadied his breathing, anchoring himself in the sensation of the ground beneath his boots. The earth here was firm, but it pulsed faintly, responding to the newly dispersed lattice. The forest was not simply observing anymore. It was participating. "The structure is decentralizing," Raymond said quietly. "Yes," the force replied. "It is adapting to your presence." Ken swallowed. "That doesn't sound reassuring." "Adaptation is neutral," the force said. "Its direction depends on what it encounters." The hollow shifted. The vast canopy overhead thinned, allowing faint shafts of muted light to filter through. The air brightened just enough to reveal new details. Countless subtle filaments stretching between tree trunks, rocks, and patches of earth, forming an invisible web now barely perceptible. Ken realized with a slow chill that the lattice had always been there, threaded through the forest. They had merely reached the point where it could no longer remain hidden. "We're inside its nervous system," he murmured. Raymond considered that. Or its memory. The force did not correct either interpretation. They moved forward, careful, their steps measured. The ground responded, firming beneath their feet, guiding them along a path that had not existed moments before. It curved gently, leading them deeper into the hollow, toward a region where the filaments converged more densely. Ken felt an unfamiliar sensation stirring within him, something like resonance. His earlier self-doubt no longer pressed as heavily, but it had not vanished. Instead, it had become responsive, like a tuning fork, vibrating faintly in harmony with the forest's awareness. Raymond experienced something similar. His instinct for control had softened, not weakened, but integrated, becoming more flexible, more discerning. He could still sense the potential for dominance, but it no longer demanded immediate expression. "This place is recalibrating us," Ken said. "Or revealing the parts we've ignored," Raymond replied. They approached a cluster of standing stones, half buried in the earth. Their surfaces were etched with faint markings, not symbols exactly, but layered impressions of intention, as if countless hands had once rested here, imprinting their unresolved questions into the stone. Ken slowed. "This feels familiar." Raymond nodded. "Not memory. Recognition." As they stepped between the stones, the filaments overhead pulsed, their glow deepening. The air thickened again, not with pressure, but with density, as if reality itself had become more viscous. The force's presence sharpened. "You are nearing a convergence of narrative," it said, "where paths intersect." Ken frowned. "Narrative." "Story," the force clarified. "Meaning constructed through sequence and choice." Raymond's gaze darkened slightly. "So this place doesn't just respond to us. It frames us." "Yes," the force said. "And you frame it in return." They emerged into another clearing, smaller than the last, but more intimate. The ground here was smooth, worn, and warm. At its center stood a shallow pool, its surface perfectly still, reflecting not the canopy above, but a shifting mosaic of indistinct shapes. Ken peered into it. For a moment, he thought he saw movement beneath the surface, not shadows, but potential. "What is this?" he asked. "A point of recursive observation," the force said. "What you see here depends on what you bring." Raymond crouched beside the pool, studying his reflection. It did not behave like a normal mirror. His features wavered, blurring into other expressions, other ages, other possibilities. Faces he might have worn had circumstances shifted slightly. Ken felt a shiver run through him. "It's showing us who we could have been." "And who you still might become," the force added. The surface rippled gently. Ken straightened. "That feels dangerous." "All truth is," the force replied, "because it destabilizes certainty." Raymond stood. "We don't have to look." "No," the force agreed. "But avoidance has consequences." Ken hesitated, then stepped closer. He knelt, gazing into the pool. The shifting images coalesced briefly, forming a version of himself standing alone, older, hardened, eyes dulled by resignation. He inhaled sharply. "That's not a future," he said. "That's a warning." The image shifted again, this time showing him surrounded by others, engaged, animated, yet burdened, visibly carrying the weight of difficult decisions. "That one," Raymond said quietly, "looks heavier." "But more real," Ken replied. The pool stilled, as if acknowledging the observation. Raymond turned his attention inward, bracing himself, then looked into the water. His reflection fragmented into countless overlapping silhouettes, each representing a different configuration of power, responsibility, isolation, connection. One image lingered, himself standing at the center of a vast network, directing flows of energy and intention, composed, controlled, but profoundly alone. Another showed him standing beside Ken, both of them facing an unseen horizon, uncertainty etched into their posture, but connection anchoring them. Raymond exhaled slowly. "Neither is simple." "No," the force said. "Complexity is the cost of awareness." The pool's surface dimmed, its images dissolving back into abstraction. "Why show us this?" Ken asked. "Because you will soon encounter decisions that echo across these possibilities," the force replied. "And you must understand that no choice is singular." Raymond frowned. "You keep talking about consequences. But consequences imply causality. This place feels more entangled." The force's presence seemed to incline. "Causality here is layered," it said. "Your actions ripple backward and forward. Memory informs intention. Intention reshapes memory. You are already influencing outcomes you have not yet perceived." Ken felt a chill. That sounds like a paradox. Only from a linear perspective, the force replied. The forest stirred. Beyond the clearing, subtle movement rippled through the trees. Not hostile, but alert. The filaments overhead vibrated, their glow intensifying. Raymond's posture tightened. We're not alone anymore. No, the force said. Others have begun to notice your presence. Ken scanned the surrounding shadows. Others like? Not beings, the force clarified. Processes. Patterns of response. The forest does not act as a single entity. It is a network of interacting dynamics. That's not comforting either, Ken muttered. They resumed walking, the path now more defined, though still mutable. The ground sloped upward, leading them toward a ridge where the forest canopy thinned dramatically. As they climbed, the air grew cooler, the filaments less dense, the awareness around them more diffuse. Ken felt a strange lightness, as if the deeper pressure of the forest were temporarily easing. This feels like a boundary, he said. Yes, the force replied. Between internal and external domains. Raymond glanced toward the thinning trees. What's beyond? Perspective, the force said. They crested the ridge. Beyond it stretched a vast expanse of terrain unlike anything they had seen within the forest. The trees receded, giving way to rolling fields of dark grass interspersed with clusters of crystalline structures that rose from the earth at irregular intervals. The sky above was not sky at all, but a shifting gradient of muted color, neither day nor night. Ken stared. This isn't forest. No, the force said. This is projection. Raymond frowned. Of what? Of accumulated intention, the force replied. A landscape shaped by unresolved trajectories. Ken felt a subtle pull toward the crystalline structures. They glowed faintly, each emitting a distinct resonance that brushed against his awareness like distant music. Those are outcomes, he ventured. Anchors, the force said. Points where potential has condensed. Raymond studied them. So each one represents a possible future? Not singular, the force corrected. Convergences of many. Ken felt both drawn and wary. And we're supposed to, what? Choose. Not yet, the force said. Observation precedes agency. They descended the ridge into the field. The grass bent beneath their steps, whispering faintly, though no sound reached their ears. The environment here felt less sentient, more structural, as if this realm functioned as a conceptual scaffold. Ken approached the nearest crystalline formation. Up close, it revealed intricate internal patterns, light refracting through layers of translucent geometry. As he reached out, the structure reacted, its glow intensifying, projecting a cascade of fleeting images across its surface. He recoiled slightly. It's responding to me. Yes, the force said. Your presence perturbs its equilibrium. Raymond stepped beside him. What do you see? Ken hesitated. Fragments. Moments. Places I don't recognize. Faces I almost do. Raymond extended his own hand. The crystal's pattern shifted again, merging Ken's images with new ones, layering them into complex composite scenes. Ken gasped softly. That's us. Not exactly as they were, but as they might be. Standing in unfamiliar environments, interacting with people they had not yet met, confronting challenges they could only partially comprehend. Raymond felt a subtle ache in his chest. So these are projections of our path. Among countless others, the force said. You are seeing only those most proximal to your current trajectory. Ken pulled his hand back. This is overwhelming. Good, the force replied. Overwhelm prevents premature certainty. They moved deeper into the field, passing between clusters of crystalline anchors. Each emitted its own resonance, forming a complex harmonic field that vibrated through their bodies. Ken felt a growing awareness of interconnectedness, a sense that every step they took subtly altered the distribution of potential around them. Raymond sensed the same, his mind grappling with the implications. So if we change our behavior now, entire landscapes rearrange, the force finished. Ken laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. No pressure. They reached the center of the field, where a larger formation loomed. Unlike the others, it was opaque, its surface matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "This one feels different," Ken said. "Yes," the force replied. "It represents a convergence not yet resolved." Raymond studied it. "What kind of convergence?" "One involving direct confrontation," the force said, "with elements you have not yet integrated." Ken felt a tightening in his chest. Like what? The force did not answer immediately. Instead, the field began to shift. The crystalline structures subtly reoriented, their collective resonance deepening. The gradient sky darkened, its colors saturating into heavier tones. Raymond felt the change before he saw it. The awareness around them sharpened, narrowing, as if the entire domain were focusing on a single emergent variable. "Something's activating," he said. "Yes," the force replied. "A response to your increasing coherence." Ken frowned. "That doesn't sound good." "Coherence attracts attention," the force said. "Not all attention is benign." The opaque structure at the center of the field trembled, its surface rippling faintly. Ken stepped back instinctively. "What is that?" "A point of adaptive resistance," the force replied. "An emergent counterbalance." Raymond's jaw tightened. "So the forest learns, and so does whatever opposes us." "Opposition is not personal," the force said. "It is systemic." The structure pulsed again, more strongly. Subtle fractures appeared across its surface, glowing faintly from within. Ken felt a surge of unease. "This is starting to feel like escalation." "Yes," the force agreed. "You are approaching thresholds that cannot be crossed without reciprocal reaction." Raymond took a slow breath. "So what do we do?" "You continue," the force said. "Deliberately." The fractures widened, releasing threads of darkened light that coiled outward, interacting with the surrounding filaments. The field responded, its harmonic resonance destabilizing. Ken's heart pounded. "That thing is changing the environment." "Reasserting equilibrium," the force said. "Through contrast." Raymond placed himself slightly in front of Ken, not protectively, but instinctively aligning their stance. The structure's surface split further, revealing a dense interior of shifting patterns, far more chaotic than the ordered lattice they had previously encountered. Ken felt a sudden, piercing recognition. "This feels like everything we've been avoiding." "Yes," the force said. "Unresolved trajectories accumulate pressure. Eventually, they manifest." The air thickened again, not with fear, but with imminence. Raymond clenched his fists, steadying his breathing. "So this is the confrontation you warned us about." "Not the final one," the force replied, "but a necessary one." The structure's interior pattern surged, projecting a wave of destabilizing energy across the field. The crystalline anchors flickered, their resonance faltering. Ken staggered, catching himself. "Raymond." "I've got you," Raymond said, gripping his shoulder. The wave did not knock them down. Instead, it passed through them, stirring deep emotional currents, dragging buried tensions back to the surface. Ken felt anger surge, not directed at Raymond, but at himself, at the years spent hesitating, deferring, retreating. It burned, sharp and insistent. Raymond felt a corresponding surge of frustration, the weight of leadership pressing harder, the impulse to seize control, to impose order on chaos. They stood within the turbulence, struggling to remain aligned. "Do not resist the surfacing," the force said. "Channel it." Ken's breath came faster. "How?" "Through intentional action," the force replied. "Not reaction." Raymond closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. He felt the urge to command, to override, to dominate the moment. Instead, he redirected it, transforming control into focus, into clarity. Ken did the same, allowing his anger to sharpen his awareness rather than consume it. The turbulence began to settle, its energy reorganizing around their stabilized presence. The structure at the field's center shuddered, its fractures widening, as if responding to their internal recalibration. Ken stared. "It's reacting to us." "Yes," the force said, "because you are no longer passive variables." The environment grew tense. every filament taut with restrained motion. Raymond exhaled slowly. Then whatever comes next, we face it the same way. Ken nodded, though his pulse still raced. Together, the opaque structure pulsed once more, its interior patterns accelerating, suggesting imminent transformation. Around them, the crystalline anchors brightened in response, their harmonic field tightening into a focused resonance. The sky above darkened further, its gradient compressing into a narrow band of dim light. Ken felt the weight of anticipation settle heavily across his shoulders, not as dread, but as readiness. Raymond stood beside him, posture steady, eyes fixed on the unfolding convergence. The force remained present, attentive, but silent, as if deliberately withholding guidance. The field held its breath. And now, before the next chapter unfolds, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Which city, which country, which corner of the world? Drop your location in the comments and let me see how far this journey has traveled. From quiet rooms to busy streets, from late-night screens to early morning listeners, I want to know where you're standing as this story reaches you. Because what's coming next will change everything. So tell me, where are you watching from?